The sharp hiss of the blast door closing echoed through the dark corridors of the Federation facility. Ethan Ryder crouched low, signaling his team forward with a quick gesture. His heart raced, though his face remained stoic, hardened by years of fighting in the shadows. This wasn't his first raid, but something about this mission nagged at him. It felt familiar in ways he couldn't explain, like walking through a memory he wasn't supposed to have. "Clear," John whispered from the front, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the facility systems. Ethan nodded, and they pressed forward. His team consisted of 4 men, each a skilled operative in their own right. They had been handpicked by Commander Davis, the leader of the human resistance, for this mission. Their objective was simple: extract data from the Federation's central servers and return to base before the enemy even knew they were there. Yet, despite the simplicity of the plan, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were already being watched. As they moved deeper into the facility, he caught a glimpse of John from the corner of his eye. Something in the man's movement seemed off, too precise, too rehearsed. John had always been sharp, but now there was an almost mechanical quality to him. Ethan's mind flickered back to their briefing earlier that day, a conversation that felt distant and fragmented, like a dream just beyond recall. Had John seemed different then too, or was it just the stress of the mission playing tricks on him? A faint beep broke through his thoughts. They had reached the server room. John moved forward, his hands deftly working to override the system's security protocols. Ethan stood back, eyes scanning the room for any sign of trouble. The rest of the team was quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt deliberate. "Something's not right," Ethan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken doubt. John turned, his face expressionless. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated. How could he explain it? The creeping sense of déjà vu that had been following him since they arrived, the way his memories seemed to blur at the edges whenever he tried to recall details of the plan. "This place," he said slowly. "It feels too easy. We should have encountered more resistance by now." John's gaze lingered on him a moment longer than necessary. Then he shrugged. "Maybe we're just getting better at this." Ethan frowned but said nothing. The sense of unease deepened, settling in his chest like a weight. Something wasn't adding up. As John finished his work, the door to the server room slid open with a low hiss, revealing rows of blinking terminals. Ethan stepped inside, his boots silent on the polished floor as they moved between the machines. His mind drifted to his first encounter with Davis. It had been a year ago, maybe more. It was hard to keep track of time when memories felt so fragmented. Davis had told him the truth about the aliens who ran the Federation, about the subtle form of mind control they exerted over humanity. Most people never realized they were being manipulated, their thoughts and memories altered to suit the Federation's needs. But Davis had shown Ethan the cracks in the illusion, the inconsistencies that hinted at a greater conspiracy. It was those cracks that had led Ethan to the rebellion, to this moment. "Data's downloading," John said, his voice breaking through Ethan's thoughts. "We're almost done." Ethan nodded, but his focus remained elsewhere. He glanced at the others, Kane and Reed, both of whom stood by silent and watchful. Their eyes betrayed nothing, and that worried him. In the beginning, they had been a tight unit, trusting each other implicitly. Now that trust felt paper-thin, stretched to the breaking point. Suddenly, Ethan's calm buzzed in his ear, and Davis's voice came through, terse and crackling. "Ethan, you need to get out now." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What's going on?" "No time. You've been compromised." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Ethan glanced at John, who was staring back at him, his hand hovering over his sidearm. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze, tension crackling in the air. "Compromised? How?" Ethan asked, his voice low, controlled. "There's a mole in your team," Davis replied. "We don't know who yet, but the aliens." Static cut off the rest of the transmission. But Ethan didn't need to hear the rest. The look in John's eyes told him everything he needed to know. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his own weapon, his pulse quickening as he tried to make sense of the situation. Could John be the traitor? Or was Ethan's mind playing tricks on him, the result of the very control they were trying to fight? His grip tightened on his pistol, eyes locked on John's. For a brief, agonizing moment, he hesitated. The lines between enemy and ally had never seemed so blurred. "We need to leave," Ethan said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Now." The cold wind outside the abandoned bunker cut through Ethan's jacket, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were miles away, looping through fragments of memories that felt less and less reliable with each passing moment. John, Kane, and Reed sat nearby, their faces etched with exhaustion, though none of them spoke. The mission had gone off without a hitch, but Davis's warning still echoed in Ethan's mind. "You've been compromised." Ethan glanced at John, his second-in-command, who was busy cleaning his gear. Each movement was deliberate, mechanical, but there was an eerie detachment in the way John worked. Ethan couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that his trusted comrade was hiding something. "How long are we staying here?" Kane broke the silence, his voice gruff. He was the muscle of the group, sharp but with a tendency to speak before thinking. "Until Davis contacts us again," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady. He knew better than to reveal the storm brewing inside his mind. "We're safer now." Safe. The word tasted bitter. How could they be safe when Ethan couldn't trust his own team, or worse, his own memories? Suddenly, a flash of a different time hit him, a moment buried deep but surfacing now with brutal clarity. He saw Captain Gray, his old mentor, standing beside him on a Federation warship years ago. Gray had been more than a superior, he had been a friend, a father figure in the chaos of war. They had trusted each other without question. Then, in that final battle, Gray had turned on him. No warning, no explanation. Gray had opened fire on their own men, forcing Ethan to react. The memory of pulling the trigger, of watching Gray's body hit the ground, haunted him even now. As Gray lay dying, he had whispered something to Ethan, something that made no sense at the time. "Remember the truth." Ethan snapped back to the present, his hand unconsciously gripping his sidearm. How many more of his memories had been tampered with? Could Gray's betrayal have been the result of mind control? If the Federation had been manipulating people for this long, how deep did it go? "We need to talk," John said suddenly, breaking through Ethan's thoughts. His eyes were locked on Ethan's, and there was an intensity there that hadn't been present before. It was a challenge, subtle but unmistakable. "About what?" Ethan asked, his voice deceptively calm. "The mission." "Davis." John leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Things aren't adding up." Ethan's pulse quickened. He had been waiting for this, but not like this. "What do you mean?" "Davis isn't who he says he is." John's eyes flicked to Kane and Reed, who were now watching the conversation intently. Ethan's grip on his weapon tightened. "And how do you know that?" John hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. I'm not sure. But I know something's wrong. We're being used, Ethan. We're pawns in a game we don't understand." Ethan's mind raced. Was John telling the truth, or was this another manipulation? Another layer of the Federation's control? He glanced at Kane and Reed, trying to gauge their reactions. Kane looked confused, his brow furrowed as he tried to follow the conversation. But Reed's face was unreadable, a perfect mask of neutrality. Too perfect. Ethan's instincts screamed at him, but he forced himself to remain still. "We need more information," he said carefully. "We can't act on suspicion alone." John nodded, but the tension in his body didn't ease. "Agreed. But we need to be careful. We don't know who we can trust." "Trust." The word hung in the air, a fragile thing in a world where reality itself seemed to bend. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind still grappling with the implications of John's words. If Davis wasn't who he claimed to be, then who was he? And what did that mean for the resistance, for the fight against the Federation? He thought back to the inconsistencies he'd noticed, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The way his memories seemed to shift and change, the details that didn't quite align. Had he been ignoring the signs all along, too focused on the mission to see the truth? "We need to get back to base," Ethan said finally. "Confront Davis directly. It's the only way to know for sure." John nodded, a grim determination settling over his features. "I'm with you." Kane and Reed exchanged a glance, an unspoken communication passing between them. Then Kane shrugged, a humorless smile tugging at his lips. "Hell, why not? It's not like we've got anything better to do." Reed remained silent, but his eyes never left Ethan's face. There was a calculating look there, a coldness that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. As they prepared to move out, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But what choice did they have? The truth, whatever it was, lay ahead. And they had to face it, no matter the cost. The journey back to the resistance base was tense and silent. Ethan drove, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, while John sat beside him, his face a mask of concentration. Kane and Reed were in the back, their presence a constant reminder of the uncertainty that now hung over the team. As they approached the base, Ethan felt a sense of unease settle over him. The familiar sight of the camouflaged entrance, hidden amongst the rugged terrain, did little to ease his nerves. If anything, it only served to heighten his suspicion. They parked the vehicle and made their way inside, the air thick with apprehension. The base was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Ethan's hand rested on his sidearm, ready to draw at a moment's notice. They found Davis in the command center, hunched over a console, his face illuminated by the glow of the screens. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," he greeted, his voice even. "I wasn't expecting you back so soon." Ethan stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Davis's face. "We need to talk." Davis raised an eyebrow. "About?" "The mission. The Federation. Everything." Ethan's voice was low, controlled. "Things aren't adding up, Davis. We need answers." Davis leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking to each member of the team in turn. "I see. And what, exactly, isn't adding up?" John stepped forward, his stance mirroring Ethan's. "You, for starters. Who are you, really? And what aren't you telling us?" Davis's face remained impassive. "I'm exactly who I've always been, John. The leader of this resistance, fighting to free humanity from the Federation's control." "Then why do I feel like we're being manipulated?" Ethan pressed. "Why do my memories feel like they're not my own?" Davis sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Sit down, all of you. There's something you need to know." They took their seats, the tension in the room palpable. Davis leaned forward, his elbows resting on the console. "The Federation's control runs deeper than any of us realized," he began. "It's not just about altering memories or influencing thoughts. It's about reshaping reality itself." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "The technology they possess, the power they wield, it's beyond anything we can comprehend. They can manipulate time, space, even the very fabric of existence." Davis's voice was low, urgent. "And they've been using that power to keep humanity enslaved for centuries." John shook his head, disbelief etched on his features. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Davis countered. "Think about it. The inconsistencies in your memories, the feeling that something isn't quite right. That's the result of the Federation's manipulation." Ethan's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The déjà vu, the fragmented memories, the sense that he was living in a dream. It all made a twisted kind of sense. "So what do we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Davis's eyes met his, a fierce determination burning within them. "We fight back. We find a way to break their control, to shatter the illusion they've created." "How?" Kane's voice was rough, skeptical. "By understanding the truth," Davis replied. "By learning to see beyond the lies they've fed us." He turned to the console, his fingers flying over the keys. Images flashed on the screen, diagrams and schematics that made little sense to Ethan. "The key lies in their technology," Davis explained. "If we can find a way to disrupt it, to turn it against them, we might stand a chance." Reed, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "And what if we can't? What if this is all just another layer of their control?" Davis met his gaze, unflinching. "Then we keep fighting. We keep searching for the truth, no matter where it leads us." Ethan felt a weight settle on his shoulders, the burden of knowledge, of responsibility. If what Davis said was true, then the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. The fate of humanity itself hung in the balance. "Where do we start?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Davis smiled, a grim, determined thing. "We start by understanding our enemy. And we don't stop until we've torn their illusion down, piece by piece." As the team settled in, ready to delve into the secrets Davis had uncovered, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The truth, long hidden by the Federation's lies, was finally within reach. But the path ahead was fraught with danger, each step a battle against an enemy that could warp reality itself. They would need all their strength, all their cunning, to survive. And even then, there was no guarantee of success. The Federation's power was vast, their control nearly absolute. To challenge them was to court destruction, to risk everything on the slim hope of freedom. Yet what choice did they have? To live as slaves, their very thoughts bent to the will of their masters? No, that was no life at all. They would fight, even if it meant their own oblivion. They would cling to the truth, to the hope of a world free from the Federation's grasp. And perhaps, in the end, that would be enough. Perhaps the human spirit, indomitable and unyielding, would prove stronger than any illusion, any technology. Ethan looked around the room, at the faces of his comrades, etched with determination and resolve. They were ready, he realized. Ready to face whatever lay ahead, no matter the cost. And with that knowledge came a flicker of hope, a spark that could ignite the flames of rebellion. The Federation had underestimated them, underestimated the power of the human will. And that would be their undoing. The fight was just beginning, but one thing was certain. They would not go quietly into the night. They would rage against the dying of the light, until the very end. The command center hummed with activity, the air charged with a newfound sense of purpose. Ethan stood at the center of it all, his eyes scanning the screens that surrounded him, each one displaying a different facet of the Federation's vast network. Beside him, Davis worked tirelessly, his fingers dancing across the console as he delved deeper into the secrets he had uncovered. John, Kane, and Reed were scattered throughout the room, each focused on their own task, their own piece of the puzzle. They had been at it for hours, sifting through data, analyzing patterns, searching for any weakness in the Federation's armor. It was tedious work, the kind that strained the eyes and numbed the mind, but none of them complained. The stakes were too high, the goal too important. Ethan rubbed his eyes, trying to dispel the fatigue that tugged at his consciousness. His mind felt stretched, overloaded with information, with the weight of the revelations that Davis had laid bare. The Federation's control, he had learned, was not just a matter of manipulation, but of complete domination. They had the power to alter reality, to reshape the very fabric of space and time. And they had used that power to create a world where humanity was little more than a plaything, a resource to be exploited. But there were cracks in their facade, chinks in their armor. Tiny flaws in the illusion they had woven, inconsistencies that betrayed the truth. And it was these flaws that Davis had been exploiting, these cracks that he had been prying open, bit by bit. "I think I've found something," John called out, his voice cutting through the din of activity. Ethan and Davis turned, their attention immediately focused on the screen before him. "What is it?" Ethan asked, moving closer. John pointed to a schematic, a complex web of lines and symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. "This is a diagram of one of their control nodes," he explained. "A key point in their network, responsible for maintaining the illusion in a specific area." Davis leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "If we could disrupt that node, even for a short time, it would create a ripple effect," John finished. "A momentary break in the illusion, a chance for people to see the truth." Ethan felt a surge of excitement, a flicker of hope. "Can we do it?" Davis nodded, a slow, considering motion. "It won't be easy. The node will be heavily guarded, both physically and psychically. We'll need to plan carefully, strike with precision. We'll need a diversion," Kane chimed in, his brow furrowed in thought. "Something to draw their attention, keep them occupied while we hit the node." Reed, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "I might have an idea. But it's risky." All eyes turned to him, expectant. Reed took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "We've all seen how the Federation's control can warp our perceptions, our memories. What if we could turn that against them?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "We create a false memory, a scenario that they'll perceive as a threat. Something that will trigger their defenses, keep them focused on the wrong thing." Reed's voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension, of barely suppressed energy. Davis considered this, his expression thoughtful. "It could work. But the memory would have to be convincing, something they wouldn't question." "Leave that to me," Reed said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "I've got a few ideas." Ethan felt a flicker of unease, a sense that there was something Reed wasn't saying. But he pushed it aside. They were all keeping secrets now, all harboring their own doubts and fears. It was the nature of the game they were playing, the price of the truth they sought. "All right," Davis said, his tone decisive. "We have a plan. Now we need to put it into action." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation, of honing skills and gathering resources. They worked with a fervor bordering on desperation, driven by the knowledge that every moment counted, that any delay could be fatal. And through it all, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that every move they made was being observed and analyzed by an unseen enemy. It was a paranoia born of necessity, a survival instinct honed by years of living under the Federation's thumb. But as they made their final preparations, as they stood on the brink of their most daring operation yet, Ethan felt a calm settle over him. A clarity of purpose, a resolve that cut through the fear and doubt. They were striking at the heart of the illusion, at the very foundation of the Federation's power. And win or lose, they would face the consequences together. As a team. As the last bastion of humanity's free will. They moved out under the cover of darkness, each step a defiance, each breath a rebellion. The Federation had controlled them for too long, had dictated their every thought and action. It was time to take back control, to seize their destiny with both hands. It was time for the human spirit to rise, to reclaim its birthright. The battle was about to begin. The night air was thick with tension as Ethan and his team approached the control node. The structure loomed before them, a monolith of alien technology, its surface pulsing with an eerie, hypnotic light. They moved silently, each step carefully measured, each breath tightly controlled. They knew the slightest misstep could alert the Federation, could bring the full force of their power crashing down upon them. Reed took the lead, his movements fluid and assured. He had been responsible for creating the diversion, for planting the false memory that would occupy the Federation's attention. Ethan could only hope that it would be enough, that it would buy them the time they needed. As they drew closer to the node, Ethan's senses heightened, his every nerve on high alert. He could feel the energy emanating from the structure, a palpable force that seemed to press against his skin, to worm its way into his mind. Beside him, John and Kane took up positions, their weapons at the ready. Davis hung back, his eyes fixed on a portable console, monitoring the Federation's activity. "We're in position," Reed's voice crackled over the comm, tight with controlled anticipation. "Initiating diversion, now." For a moment, nothing happened. The night remained still, the only sound the faint hum of the node. Then, chaos erupted. Alarms blared, a cacophony of sound that shattered the silence. The node's surface rippled, its light intensifying to a blinding glare. And in the distance, Ethan could hear the sound of movement, of heavy footsteps and barked orders. "It's working," Davis said, his voice tense. "They're responding to the false memory, diverting resources to counter the perceived threat." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Let's move." They surged forward, closing the distance to the node in a matter of seconds. Up close, the structure was even more imposing, its scale dizzying. Reed was already at work, his fingers flying over a control panel, his face a mask of concentration. Ethan and the others took up defensive positions, their eyes scanning for any sign of resistance. But none came. The Federation forces were occupied, their attention divided. For the moment, at least, the team was clear to proceed. "I'm in," Reed said, his voice tight with focus. "Initiating disruption sequence." The node shuddered, its light flickering, growing erratic. Ethan could feel the change in the air, a sudden charge that set his teeth on edge. "It's working," John breathed, his eyes wide. "I can feel it, the illusion weakening. It's like a veil lifting." Ethan felt it too, a sudden clarity, a sharpening of his senses. For the first time in as long as he could remember, his thoughts felt entirely his own, unencumbered by the Federation's influence. But the sensation was short-lived. The node's light stabilized, its hum growing steady once more. Reed cursed under his breath, his fingers moving with renewed urgency. "They're adapting," he said, his voice strained. "Trying to counter our intrusion." Davis's voice crackled over the comm, urgent. "You need to hurry. They're starting to realize the diversion was a ruse, redirecting their forces back to your location." Ethan's heart raced, adrenaline surging through his veins. They were so close, the taste of victory tantalizingly near. But the Federation's power was vast, their control nearly absolute. If they couldn't complete the disruption. Almost there, Reed gritted out, sweat beading on his brow. Just a few more seconds. But those seconds stretched into an eternity. The sound of approaching forces grew louder, the ground trembling beneath the tread of heavy machinery. Ethan and the others formed a tight circle around Reed, their weapons trained on the perimeter, ready to defend their position to the last. And then, with a final, triumphant keystroke, Reed let out a victorious shout. The node's light died, its hum fading into silence. And in that moment, Ethan felt a wave of energy wash over him, a psychic shockwave that seemed to ripple through reality itself. Around them, the illusion shattered. The sleek, otherworldly structures of the Federation flickered and faded, revealing the rusted, decaying ruins beneath. The air shimmered, the very atmosphere seeming to warp and twist as the veil of control was lifted. And in the distance, the advancing Federation forces faltered, confusion and disarray spreading through their ranks as the truth of their existence was laid bare. For a moment, all was still. Ethan and his team stood amidst the ruins, the weight of their achievement slowly sinking in. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the Federation, had proven that their control was not absolute. But the fight was far from over. Even now, Ethan knew, the Federation would be regrouping, adapting. They would not let this defiance go unanswered. Davis's voice broke the silence, a mixture of triumph and solemnity. "You've done it. You've shown that they can be beaten. But this is only the beginning. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. They had won a battle, but the war stretched before them, vast and daunting. But they would not falter. They would take this victory, this moment of clarity, and use it to fuel their fight. They would spread the truth, rally humanity to their cause. And bit by bit, they would tear down the Federation's illusion, would reclaim the freedom that was their birthright. It would not be easy. It would demand everything they had, and more. But they would not back down, would not surrender. For they were human. Resilient, indomitable, unconquerable. And they would fight, until their last breath, for the right to determine their own fate. The Federation had sown the seeds of their own destruction, had underestimated the power of the human spirit. And now, they would reap the whirlwind. The team exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then, as one, they turned their backs on the ruined node, on the shattered remnants of the illusion. Before them, the true world beckoned, harsh and unforgiving, but filled with the promise of freedom. They took a step forward, then another. The battle had been won. But the war? The war was just beginning.